Apollo Global Management owns everything from fast food chains to luxury hotels, but buried deep within their investment portfolio is something far more controversial: America's largest private army. In 2025, this Wall Street giant controls Constellis Holdings, the company that emerged from Blackwater's ashes, and the numbers are staggering. We're talking about a private military empire with over 14,000 employees that deploys personnel to more countries than most intelligence agencies, and Constellis maintains minimal public disclosures about its global deployments, despite operating across dozens of nations. But what most people don't understand is how dramatically this organization has changed since its Blackwater days. The Phoenix rises, Constellis in 2025. Today's corporate structure represents a complete reinvention of how private military contractors operate in America. While Blackwater once dominated headlines with scandal after scandal, most notably the 2007 Nisour Square massacre that killed 17 Iraqi civilians, Constellis Holdings now operates as a quiet corporate giant that most Americans have never heard of. The company sits comfortably within Apollo Global Management's massive investment portfolio, sharing space with household names like Yahoo, Shutterfly, and the University of Phoenix. This placement represents something unprecedented in American corporate history: a private army nestled alongside consumer brands that families interact with regularly. Apollo's 2025 portfolio spans $671 billion in assets under management, and Constellis represents just one piece of this financial empire. The private equity firm treats the military contractor with the same analytical approach they apply to retail chains or restaurant franchises. Apollo's 2024 recapitalization deal restructured Constellis into two distinct divisions, optimizing operational efficiency in the same way they might reorganize a struggling retail chain. Board meetings evaluate personnel deployment costs alongside franchise expansion plans. The corporate integration runs so deep that Apollo's pension fund investors unknowingly profit from private military operations through their retirement accounts. This sanitized corporate structure masks the reality of what Constellis actually does. The company maintains training facilities across multiple states, operates logistics networks that span continents, and employs thousands of personnel with military and intelligence backgrounds. Yet public awareness of these operations remains virtually non-existent. Local news outlets rarely cover Constellis facilities in their communities. Congressional hearings about defense spending rarely mention the company by name. The corporate anonymity that Blackwater never achieved has become Constellis's greatest strategic advantage. The scale of modern private military operations extends far beyond what most defense analysts recognize. Constellis coordinates simultaneous operations across 6 continents, manages supply chains that rival major corporations, and maintains communication networks that connect remote outposts to corporate headquarters in Virginia. The company operates aircraft fleets, armored vehicle pools, and specialized equipment inventories that would be impressive for a small nation's military. These assets support missions ranging from diplomatic security to infrastructure protection, yet the general public remains largely unaware of their existence. Corporate secrecy has become an art form at Constellis. The company publishes minimal public information about its operations, maintains strict media policies, and operates through a network of subsidiary companies that obscure the true scope of its activities. This approach represents a dramatic shift from Blackwater's high-profile era, when Eric Prince regularly appeared on television and the company's name appeared in major news stories. Today's Constellis leadership avoids public attention entirely, delegating media interactions to corporate communications specialists who provide carefully crafted responses that reveal nothing meaningful about operations. The financial mechanisms that support this corporate structure create a disturbing disconnect between investors and consequences. Pension funds from teachers, firefighters, and police officers generate returns through Apollo's investment in Constellis, yet these public servants have no knowledge that their retirement savings fund private military operations. Mutual funds marketed to middle-class investors include Apollo Holdings, creating a situation where suburban families indirectly profit from international security contracts. This financial architecture ensures that private military operations maintain broad-based support through economic incentives, even as public opinion surveys show skepticism about PMC activities. Wall Street's embrace of private military contractors represents a fundamental shift in how America approaches national security. Traditional defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon face extensive congressional oversight, detailed financial reporting requirements, and constant media scrutiny. Constellis operates under far less stringent oversight while generating comparable revenues. The company benefits from the same tax advantages available to other corporations, receives similar investment bank coverage, and enjoys the same legal protections that shield mainstream businesses from operational liability. The post-Afghanistan era has created unprecedented opportunities for private military expansion. Government agencies that previously relied on uniformed personnel now routinely contract with PMCs for specialized services. The State Department's Diplomatic Security Service coordinates with Constellis on embassy protection contracts. The Defense Department partners with the company on training programs that were once conducted entirely by military personnel. Intelligence agencies utilize PMC services for operations that require plausible deniability or rapid deployment capabilities. Corporate efficiency metrics reveal how deeply PMCs have integrated into government operations. Constellis can deploy personnel to international locations within 72 hours, compared to weeks or months required for traditional military deployment. The company maintains pre-positioned equipment in strategic locations worldwide, eliminating the logistical challenges that constrain government forces. Specialized skill sets that might require months to develop within military units are immediately available through PMC recruitment from veteran communities. The competitive landscape among private military contractors has evolved into a sophisticated marketplace where companies compete on technological capabilities, response times, and cost efficiency. Constellis faces competition from established players like DynCorp and newer entrants that specialize in cyber warfare or drone operations. This competition drives innovation in ways that traditional military procurement processes cannot match. Companies invest heavily in research and development, pursue aggressive recruitment strategies, and develop proprietary technologies that provide competitive advantages. International expansion has become a critical growth strategy for modern PMCs. Constellis maintains offices in dozens of countries, employs local personnel who understand regional dynamics, and adapts its services to meet specific client requirements. The company works with foreign governments, international organizations, and multinational corporations that require security services beyond what traditional military or police forces can provide. These international relationships create revenue streams that are largely invisible to American oversight mechanisms. The regulatory environment surrounding PMCs has evolved in ways that favor corporate growth over public accountability. Licensing requirements vary significantly between jurisdictions, creating opportunities for companies to operate in regions with minimal oversight. International legal frameworks struggle to address the complex jurisdictional issues that arise when private military contractors operate across borders. Corporate legal teams have become expert at navigating these regulatory gaps, ensuring that PMC operations remain legally protected while maintaining operational flexibility. But the true measure of this transformation isn't found in corporate structures or regulatory frameworks. It's written in numbers that would shock most Americans who assume private military contractors represent a small niche within the defense industry. The numbers game, 2025 financial empire. Constellis generated $2.8 billion in revenue during 2025, a figure that places the company among America's largest defense contractors while maintaining profit margins that would make Fortune 500 executives envious. This financial transformation from Blackwater's peak revenue of $1.2 billion during the Iraq War demonstrates how private military contractors have evolved from niche service providers into major corporate entities that rival established defense giants. The gap between public perception and actual financial performance represents one of the most significant information asymmetries in American business. Most Americans assume that private military contractors operate as relatively small organizations that supplement government forces during specific conflicts. This assumption reflects outdated thinking from the early 2000s when PMCs were primarily associated with Iraq and Afghanistan deployments. The reality of modern private military operations involves financial scales that most people would find difficult to comprehend. Constellis has transformed into a corporate entity whose annual revenue exceeds that of many household name companies that Americans encounter daily. Traditional defense contractors face a complex web of regulatory requirements, congressional oversight, and public scrutiny that constrains their profit margins and operational flexibility. Companies like General Dynamics and Northrop Grumman must navigate extensive procurement processes, detailed financial reporting requirements, and constant political oversight. These constraints limit their ability to achieve the profit margins that characterize other industries. Constellis operates under a fundamentally different business model that allows for higher profitability while maintaining lower public visibility. The company's revenue per employee ratios exceed those of most technology companies, pharmaceutical firms, and financial services organizations. The contrast becomes even more striking when examining profit margins across the defense industry. Traditional military suppliers typically operate on margins between 8 and 12%, reflecting the competitive nature of government procurement and the regulatory constraints that govern their operations. Constellis achieves profit margins that consistently exceed 20%, a performance that would be remarkable in any industry, but becomes extraordinary when considering the operational risks and regulatory challenges associated with private military services. These margins reflect the premium rates that clients pay for specialized capabilities, rapid deployment, and operational flexibility that government forces cannot match. Defense spending constraints across Western nations have created a paradoxical situation where military budgets remain flat or decline, while demand for specialized security services continues to grow. The United States government's preference for outsourcing military and security services drives growth for the private military services market. This trend reflects the need to reduce state military expenditures and the desire for more flexible and scalable security solutions. PMCs offer tailored services that can be quickly deployed and adapted to meet specific client requirements, which proves particularly valuable in unpredictable or rapidly changing environments. Government agencies can access specialized capabilities without the long-term personnel costs and infrastructure investments required for traditional military units. Contract values across Constellis operations span an impressive geographic range that reflects the global nature of modern security challenges. The company maintains active contracts across North America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, with individual contract values ranging from several $millions for specialized training programs to hundreds of millions for comprehensive security operations. European Union contracts alone account for over $400 million in annual revenue, while African operations generate another $890 million through partnerships with governments and international organizations. Asian markets contribute approximately $320 million annually, primarily through corporate security services and infrastructure protection contracts. The deployment of these massive financial resources reveals the scope of modern private military operations. Personnel costs represent the largest expense category, with Constellis spending over $1.1 billion annually on salaries, benefits, and contractor payments. Equipment and technology investments account for another $340 million, reflecting the company's commitment to maintaining technological advantages over competitors. Logistics and transportation expenses reach $180 million annually, supporting global operations that require coordination across multiple time zones and conflict environments. Administrative and overhead costs add another $220 million, covering everything from corporate headquarters operations to legal and compliance expenses. Corporate efficiency metrics demonstrate why clients choose private military contractors over traditional alternatives. Constellis can deploy specialized teams to international locations within 72 hours, compared to the weeks or months required for government military deployments. The company maintains pre-positioned equipment caches in 23 countries, eliminating the logistical delays that constrain traditional military operations. Training programs can be customized and implemented within days rather than the months required for government procurement processes. These operational advantages allow Constellis to charge premium rates that reflect the value clients place on speed, flexibility, and specialized capabilities. Client diversity reveals the broad appeal of private military services across different sectors and geographic regions. Government contracts account for approximately 60% of Constellis revenue, with the remainder split between corporate clients and international organizations. Fortune 500 companies pay premium rates for executive protection services, facility security, and risk assessment capabilities. International mining companies, energy firms, and infrastructure developers require specialized security services in regions where traditional law enforcement cannot provide adequate protection. These commercial clients often pay higher rates than government contracts, reflecting the immediate financial stakes involved in protecting corporate assets and personnel. Apollo Global Management's board meetings illustrate how completely private military operations have integrated into mainstream corporate finance. Directors evaluate Constellis personnel deployment costs alongside Yahoo's quarterly earnings and Shutterfly's profit margins. The same analytical frameworks that assess retail performance now scrutinize military contractor efficiency. Apollo manages approximately $511 million invested directly in Constellis, treating the private military contractor with the same portfolio optimization strategies applied to consumer brands. These extraordinary financial returns have attracted continued investment from major institutions while generating operational capabilities that rival those of national militaries. But the true scope of Constellis operations extends far beyond what these impressive revenue figures suggest, reaching into regions and conflicts that most Americans would never expect to find private military contractors operating. Global footprint, the invisible army. Constellis maintains active operations in over 50 countries as of 2025, with personnel deployed across regions that rarely appear in mainstream media coverage of American military activities. Corporate facilities exist in nations where the United States government maintains no official military presence, creating a shadow network of American military capability that operates entirely outside public awareness or congressional oversight. Most Americans could not name 5 countries where United States military forces maintain permanent bases, yet this private army operates in locations that would surprise defense analysts who track traditional military deployments. The operational security surrounding PMC deployments has reached levels that would impress intelligence agencies. Constellis personnel move between countries using commercial aviation, private transportation networks, and logistics systems that leave minimal paper trails or public records. Local media outlets in host countries rarely report on PMC arrivals or departures, either because they lack awareness of these activities or because corporate security measures prevent meaningful access to information. Government officials in many nations actively cooperate with PMC operational security requirements, understanding that discretion ensures continued access to specialized capabilities that their own security forces cannot provide. African operations represent the largest concentration of Constellis personnel outside traditional conflict zones, with substantial deployments across nations that most Americans could not locate on a map. The company maintains training facilities in West Africa, logistics bases in East Africa, and operational centers in Central Africa that support missions ranging from anti-piracy operations to mineral extraction security. These African deployments operate with virtually no American media coverage, allowing Constellis to maintain extensive operations without the political scrutiny that would accompany traditional military deployments to the same regions. Middle Eastern operations continue despite the withdrawal of American forces from Iraq and Afghanistan, with Constellis maintaining substantial personnel levels across Gulf states, Jordan, Israel, and other regional partners. These deployments support embassy security contracts, corporate protection services, and specialized training programs that governments prefer to conduct through private contractors rather than official military partnerships. The company operates from bases that were originally constructed for American military forces but now serve as permanent PMC facilities with long-term lease agreements and infrastructure investments. European operations span NATO member nations and neutral countries, reflecting the continent's growing reliance on private security services for missions that governments cannot publicly acknowledge. Constellis maintains facilities in the United Kingdom, Germany, Poland, and several other nations where the company provides services ranging from cybersecurity training to counterterrorism support. These European operations benefit from a continent's regulatory environment, which allows PMCs to operate with fewer restrictions than those imposed by American oversight mechanisms. Asian deployments have expanded significantly as regional tensions increase and governments seek alternatives to traditional military partnerships. Constellis operates across Southeast Asia, maintaining facilities in nations that serve as staging areas for operations throughout the region. The company provides maritime security services in waters where piracy and territorial disputes create ongoing threats to commercial shipping. Corporate clients across Asia pay premium rates for executive protection services, facility security, and risk assessment capabilities that local security forces cannot match. Personnel numbers across these global operations rival the active military strength of many developed nations. Constellis maintains over 14,000 deployed personnel worldwide, a figure that exceeds the total active military personnel of countries like Denmark, Norway, or New Zealand. These personnel include former American military members, international contractors, and locally recruited specialists who provide cultural knowledge and language capabilities. The company's human resources operations coordinate recruitment, training, and deployment across multiple continents simultaneously, managing personnel flows that would challenge many government agencies. Coordination across multiple theaters requires sophisticated communication systems and command structures that operate independently of government military networks. Constellis maintains its own satellite communication capabilities and encrypted data networks that coordinate operations across different time zones and security environments. The company's operational headquarters in Virginia serves as a global coordination center that monitors personnel, equipment, and mission status across dozens of countries simultaneously. This coordination capability allows Constellis to shift resources between regions based on changing client requirements or security threats. Logistics complexity increases exponentially when managing operations across such diverse geographic and political environments. Constellis maintains supply chains that deliver equipment, ammunition, medical supplies, and other operational necessities to personnel deployed worldwide. The company operates its own transportation networks, including aircraft fleets and shipping arrangements that move personnel and equipment between theaters without relying on commercial or government transportation systems. These logistics networks require relationships with suppliers, transportation companies, and customs officials across dozens of countries. Corporate headquarters coordination involves managing legal compliance requirements across multiple jurisdictions, each with different regulatory frameworks governing private military operations. Constellis maintains legal teams that specialize in international law, local regulations, and contractual requirements that vary significantly between countries. The company must navigate export control regulations, weapons licensing requirements, and operational restrictions that change based on local political conditions and bilateral agreements between the United States and host nations. Geopolitical implications of such widespread private military presence extend far beyond the immediate operational objectives that drive individual contracts. Constellis operations influence regional power balances, affect relationships between host nations and their neighbors, and create dependencies on American private military capabilities that can shape long-term strategic relationships. Host governments often prefer working with PMCs because these relationships avoid the political complications associated with official military partnerships while providing access to advanced capabilities and training. This extensive global network represents just one player in what has become an increasingly crowded and competitive marketplace. The success of Constellis operations has attracted numerous competitors, each seeking to capture their share of the lucrative contract. The competition wars, PMC market dynamics. Market dynamics have transformed private military contracting into a corporate battlefield where billion-dollar companies compete for contracts with the intensity of tech giants fighting for market share. This evolution represents a dramatic shift from the early 2000s when Blackwater dominated headlines as the primary PMC operating in Iraq and Afghanistan. Today's competitive landscape involves dozens of major players, each with specialized capabilities, proprietary technologies, and aggressive business development strategies designed to capture lucrative government and corporate contracts that can determine whether companies thrive or disappear entirely. Government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars change hands regularly as agencies evaluate competing proposals from PMCs that promise superior capabilities, lower costs, or specialized expertise that distinguishes them from competitors. The Department of Defense alone awards over $15 billion annually in contracts for private military services, creating a market environment where companies invest millions in proposal development, lobbying efforts, and competitive intelligence gathering to position themselves for major contract wins. A single large contract can transform a mid-tier PMC into a major industry player, while losing a renewal competition can force companies to lay off thousands of employees and abandon entire operational theaters. Constellis faces serious competitive threats from established American companies and emerging international rivals that challenge its market position through different strategic approaches. DynCorp International leverages decades of aviation and logistics expertise to compete for training and support contracts, particularly in regions where air mobility and specialized transportation capabilities provide competitive advantages. Aegis Defense Services focuses on risk management and consulting services that appeal to corporate clients seeking comprehensive security solutions rather than traditional military contracting. G4S operates as a global security giant whose scale and international presence allow the company to offer integrated services across multiple countries simultaneously. Contract competition creates winner-take-all scenarios where small differences in pricing, capabilities, or political relationships determine outcomes worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Constellis lost a major State Department contract renewal in 2024 when a competitor underbid by less than 2% while promising identical service levels, resulting in the layoff of over 1,200 personnel and the closure of 3 regional offices. Conversely, the company won a $340 million Defense Department training contract by demonstrating proprietary simulation technologies that competitors could not match, leading to immediate hiring of 800 new employees and expansion into 2 additional countries. Different PMCs pursue distinct differentiation strategies that reflect their organizational strengths and target market segments. Some companies specialize in high-risk protective services for executives and diplomats, charging premium rates for personnel with elite military backgrounds and advanced security training. Others focus on large-scale logistics and support operations that emphasize cost efficiency and operational reliability over specialized combat capabilities. Technology-focused PMCs invest heavily in cyber warfare capabilities, drone operations, and artificial intelligence systems that appeal to clients seeking cutting-edge solutions to emerging security challenges. Technological capabilities increasingly determine competitive success as clients demand advanced systems that traditional security approaches cannot provide. Constellis competes directly with companies that offer autonomous surveillance platforms, predictive threat analysis software, and integrated communication systems that provide real-time operational coordination across multiple locations. These technological arms races require substantial research and development investments that smaller PMCs cannot afford, creating barriers to entry that benefit established companies while forcing constant innovation to maintain competitive advantages. Corporate espionage represents an uncomfortable reality within the PMC industry as companies attempt to gather intelligence about competitor capabilities, pricing strategies, and client relationships. Former employees routinely move between competing companies, carrying knowledge of operational procedures, client preferences, and strategic planning that provides valuable competitive intelligence. Companies invest significant resources in counterintelligence measures designed to protect proprietary information while simultaneously attempting to gather intelligence about competitor activities through recruitment, industry networking, and careful analysis of public contract awards and corporate communications. Intelligence gathering extends beyond traditional corporate espionage into sophisticated analysis of competitor financial performance, personnel movements, and strategic partnerships that reveal competitive positioning and future business development plans. PMCs monitor competitor job postings to identify expansion into new geographic markets or service areas. They analyze subcontractor relationships to understand how competitors structure their operations and identify potential partnership opportunities. Corporate security teams track competitor executive travel patterns and conference appearances to gather intelligence about business development activities and client relationship management strategies. Profit margins across the industry reflect the competitive pressures that constrain financial performance despite large contract values. While traditional defense contractors typically operate on margins between 8 and 12%, Constellis has achieved margins that exceed these benchmarks through operational efficiency and premium service positioning. These financial advantages require continuous cost reduction efforts, operational efficiency improvements, and strategic partnerships that allow companies to bid competitively while maintaining financial viability. International competition has emerged as the most significant threat to American PMC dominance as Chinese and Russian companies offer services at substantially lower costs while providing capabilities that rival those of established Western contractors. Chinese PMCs benefit from government subsidies and state backing that allow them to bid aggressively for contracts while maintaining service levels that appeal to cost-conscious clients. Russian companies leverage extensive military experience and relationships with governments that prefer alternatives to American contractors for political or strategic reasons. Market consolidation continues as larger companies acquire smaller competitors to gain specialized capabilities, eliminate competition for specific contracts, or expand into new geographic markets. Constellis itself resulted from multiple acquisitions and mergers that combined different companies under a single corporate structure. This consolidation trend reduces the number of major competitors while creating larger companies with diverse capabilities that can compete for a broader range of contracts across multiple service categories. The global PMC market reached $394 billion in 2025, with Constellis holding approximately 7.2% market share, while facing unprecedented competition from Chinese and Russian private military firms that challenge American dominance through aggressive pricing strategies and government backing. Yet the most significant factor shaping this competitive landscape may not be market forces at all, but rather the policy decisions emerging from Washington that determine which companies receive the contracts that fuel this entire industry. Biden administration's PMC strategy. Presidential administrations discover that dismantling private military relationships creates capability gaps that government agencies cannot fill independently. The Biden administration's approach to private military contractors presents one of the most striking contradictions in modern American politics. During the 2020 campaign, Biden criticized the use of mercenaries and promised to reduce America's reliance on private military companies that had become synonymous with the excesses of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. The candidate who once called PMCs a dangerous privatization of American military power has overseen their largest expansion in recent history. Political contradictions between public statements and actual contracting decisions create a fascinating case study in how American foreign policy operates beyond the reach of electoral politics. Biden administration officials regularly emphasize their commitment to diplomacy over military force, yet their agencies award contracts to private military companies at rates that exceed previous administrations. State Department briefings highlight peaceful conflict resolution initiatives, while the same department simultaneously contracts with PMCs for operations that involve armed personnel in unstable regions. Pentagon officials testified before Congress about reducing military footprints abroad while awarding contracts that place thousands of private contractors in locations where uniformed personnel cannot operate. Agency-level demand for private military services has increased dramatically under Democratic leadership, driven by bureaucratic requirements that operate independently of political messaging. The State Department accounts for the largest portion of this increased spending, with diplomatic security contracts reaching unprecedented levels as American embassies face growing threats in an increasingly unstable international environment. Agency officials argue that PMCs provide specialized capabilities that government personnel cannot match, particularly in areas requiring rapid deployment, cultural expertise, and operational flexibility that traditional military structures cannot provide. The Central Intelligence Agency represents another major driver of increased PMC spending, though the classified nature of these contracts makes precise figures difficult to determine. Intelligence operations require capabilities that PMCs can provide with greater speed and lower political risk than traditional government approaches. The agency's partnerships with private contractors allow for operations that maintain plausible deniability while providing access to specialized skills and equipment that would take years to develop within government agencies. These relationships continue to expand under an administration that publicly emphasizes transparency and accountability in intelligence operations. The institutional momentum behind private military contracting reflects decades of policy decisions that created dependencies on private sector capabilities across multiple agencies and operational theaters. Biden administration officials who criticized PMC operations during their time in opposition discovered that reversing these relationships would require massive investments in government personnel, training programs, and infrastructure that exceed current budget constraints. The permanent bureaucracy that manages PMC relationships operates according to institutional priorities that transcend electoral cycles and political appointee preferences. Policy changes under Democratic leadership have actually expanded PMC operational authorities while implementing new oversight mechanisms that create the appearance of increased control without substantially limiting private contractor activities. The Biden administration established new reporting requirements for PMC operations, created additional review processes for contract awards, and mandated regular briefings to congressional oversight committees. These procedural changes satisfy political demands for accountability while allowing PMC operations to continue expanding into new regions and service areas that were previously restricted. The State Department's decision to permit American contractors to operate in Ukraine represents the most significant policy shift under Biden administration leadership. This change allows PMCs to provide maintenance and repair services for military equipment provided to Ukrainian forces, marking the first time since the Russian invasion that American contractors have been authorized to operate within Ukrainian territory. The policy specifically permits contractors to work on F-16 fighter jets and Patriot air defense systems that require specialized technical expertise unavailable within Ukrainian military ranks. Contractors are stationed away from front lines and do not engage in combat with Russian forces, but their presence establishes precedents for private contractor operations in active conflict zones that previous administrations avoided. Congressional oversight faces fundamental limitations in controlling PMC operations due to classification requirements, operational security concerns, and jurisdictional complexities that prevent effective legislative supervision. Committee hearings on PMC activities rarely produce substantive information about ongoing operations, contract terms, or performance metrics that would allow meaningful evaluation of program effectiveness. Classified briefings provide limited information to small groups of legislators who cannot share details with colleagues or constituents who might demand accountability for PMC activities. Regulatory frameworks governing PMC operations in 2025 reflect a complex web of executive orders, congressional legislation, and bureaucratic procedures that often contradict each other or create loopholes that PMCs exploit to maintain operational flexibility. The administration implemented new guidelines for contractor vetting procedures, established enhanced background check requirements, and created additional layers of legal review for international operations. However, these regulations contain exceptions for urgent operational requirements, ongoing contract obligations, and national security priorities that effectively exempt most PMC activities from meaningful restrictions. The Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment Initiative demonstrates how PMC operations integrate with broader foreign policy objectives through programs that combine development assistance with security services. The administration has mobilized over $80 billion for infrastructure investments across low and middle-income countries, many of which require PMC protection for successful implementation. Constellis secured a $54 million base operations support contract in Singapore during 2024, exemplifying how PMCs establish footholds across Asia through infrastructure and security partnerships that extend American influence without traditional military deployments. Despite campaign rhetoric, the Biden administration awarded PMCs $47.3 billion in contracts during 2024 to 2025, a 23% increase over the previous two-year period, driven primarily by State Department and CIA requirements that demonstrate how operational necessities override political preferences in determining American security policy. These contracts support a network of operations in 73 countries as of 2023, creating dependencies that will constrain future presidents regardless of their political affiliations or campaign promises. Yet the true scope of modern PMC capabilities extends far beyond traditional security services into technological domains that would have been unimaginable just a decade ago. Technology and innovation, the digital mercenary. Constellis operates systems that rival those of national intelligence agencies, including sophisticated cyber warfare platforms, electronic intelligence gathering networks, and artificial intelligence systems that process vast amounts of data in real time. The company's technology division employs specialists who previously worked for the National Security Agency, Central Intelligence Agency, and other government organizations that develop cutting-edge intelligence capabilities for national security purposes. These technological capabilities would have been unimaginable during the Blackwater era, when the company's primary assets consisted of training facilities, armored vehicles, and experienced personnel with military backgrounds. Cyber warfare and electronic intelligence capabilities represent perhaps the most significant evolution in PMC operations since the industry's emergence in the 1990s. Constellis maintains dedicated cyber operations centers that monitor global communications networks, track potential threats across multiple platforms, and conduct offensive cyber operations when authorized by client contracts. These capabilities include advanced malware development, network penetration testing, and digital forensic services that government agencies often lack the resources or expertise to conduct independently. The company's cyber warfare specialists operate around the clock from secure facilities that maintain the same operational security standards used by military intelligence organizations. Electronic intelligence gathering involves sophisticated monitoring systems that intercept communications, track digital signatures, and analyze patterns of activity across multiple data sources simultaneously. Constellis operates listening posts in various international locations that collect signals intelligence on behalf of government and corporate clients who require real-time information about potential threats to their operations. These systems can monitor everything from cellular communications to satellite transmissions, providing comprehensive intelligence pictures that inform strategic decision-making and tactical operations in real time. Artificial intelligence and drone technologies deployed by Constellis represent investments that exceed those of many technology companies that specialize in these areas exclusively. The company operates fleets of unmanned aerial systems that provide surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeted strikes when authorized by client agreements. These platforms utilize machine learning algorithms that improve target identification accuracy, reduce operator workload, and enable autonomous operations in environments where human control becomes impractical or dangerous. The integration of artificial intelligence with drone operations allows single operators to manage multiple platforms simultaneously while maintaining precision and effectiveness that surpass traditional manual control methods. Proprietary systems developed by Constellis create competitive advantages that allow the company to charge premium rates for services that competitors cannot match with off-the-shelf technology solutions. The company's layered extended security operations platform represents years of development work that integrates multiple sensor systems, communication networks, and analytical tools into comprehensive security management systems. These proprietary platforms provide clients with capabilities that would require years to develop independently and millions of dollars in research and development investments that most organizations cannot afford. Satellite and communications networks operated independently by Constellis demonstrate the extent to which PMCs have developed infrastructure that rivals government capabilities in scope and sophistication. The company maintains dedicated satellite communication links that provide secure, encrypted communications between personnel deployed across multiple continents and operational theaters. These networks operate independently of government systems, ensuring that PMC operations can continue even when official military or diplomatic communications face disruption or compromise. The redundancy and security of these private networks make them attractive alternatives for clients who require guaranteed communications capabilities. Research and development investments by Constellis during 2024 to 2025 totaled $340 million, representing spending levels that rival those of major defense contractors and technology companies that specialize in military applications. These investments focus on emerging technologies that will define the future of private military operations, including quantum computing applications, advanced materials research, and biotechnology applications for personnel enhancement and medical support. The company's research facilities employ hundreds of scientists and engineers who work on classified projects that government agencies cannot pursue through traditional procurement processes. The National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2025 includes provisions that aim to accelerate the Department of Defense's adoption of AI and autonomous systems, reflecting growing government recognition of technologies that PMCs like Constellis have already deployed operationally. Section 814 of the NDAA establishes new frameworks for AI integration in military operations, while Section 820 addresses contract administration procedures that affect PMC oversight mechanisms. These legislative changes demonstrate how government agencies increasingly depend on private sector innovations to maintain technological advantages. Autonomous security systems developed by Constellis represent the cutting edge of unmanned military technology, including platforms that can operate independently for extended periods while maintaining communication with human controllers who provide high-level guidance and authorization for specific actions. These systems integrate artificial intelligence with advanced sensor packages that provide comprehensive situational awareness in complex environments where human operators would face significant risks or operational limitations. The autonomous capabilities include target identification, threat assessment, and response coordination that reduces reaction times and improves operational effectiveness compared to traditional human-operated systems. Artificial intelligence-powered threat assessment platforms developed by the company analyze vast amounts of data from multiple sources to identify patterns and predict potential security threats before they materialize into actual incidents. These platforms process information from social media monitoring, communications intercepts, financial transaction analysis, and behavioral pattern recognition to create comprehensive threat pictures that inform proactive security measures. The predictive capabilities of these systems allow security personnel to position resources and implement protective measures before threats develop into actual attacks or security incidents. The company's inaugural Drone Rodeo event in October 2024 at its Moyock, North Carolina facility showcased advanced unmanned aerial systems and supporting technologies from 25 leading manufacturers and technology companies. The event highlighted emerging drone systems, counter-drone technologies, advanced sensing capabilities, and communication systems that represent the current state-of-the-art in unmanned military technology. Participation included representatives from the Department of Defense, federal and state law enforcement agencies, international delegations, and technology specialists who evaluated the latest developments in drone warfare and security applications. These technological capabilities have transformed how PMCs identify and pursue new business opportunities, allowing companies like Constellis to offer services in regions where traditional military approaches would be impractical or politically unacceptable. Advanced surveillance systems and predictive analytics enable PMCs to operate effectively in environments that most security analysts would consider too complex. Emerging markets, the new frontiers. These technological advantages have opened markets that traditional military forces cannot access, creating opportunities in regions where political sensitivities or operational complexities prevent conventional security approaches. The regions experiencing the most dramatic PMC expansion in 2025 would surprise most Americans who associate private military contractors primarily with Middle Eastern conflicts and established war zones. Constellis and its competitors have quietly established major operations across sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, creating a global network of private military presence that extends far beyond traditional conflict areas. Geopolitical implications of PMC expansion into previously untouched markets create ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate security services these companies provide. When Constellis establishes operations in nations that previously relied exclusively on their own military forces, the company's presence alters regional power dynamics and creates new dependencies on American private military capabilities. Host governments find themselves relying on PMC expertise for training, equipment maintenance, and operational planning that their domestic forces cannot provide independently. This dependency creates long-term relationships that influence everything from military procurement decisions to diplomatic alignments with the United States. Client diversity in emerging markets reveals the broad appeal of private military services across different sectors and strategic priorities. African governments contract with PMCs for anti-terrorism operations, border security missions, and protection of critical infrastructure that local forces cannot adequately secure. International mining companies operating in unstable regions pay premium rates for comprehensive security services that include everything from facility protection to evacuation planning. Energy companies drilling in remote locations require specialized security capabilities that combine traditional protection services with environmental monitoring and community relations management. Economic factors driving PMC investment in emerging markets include resource extraction opportunities, infrastructure development projects, and strategic positioning that creates long-term revenue potential. Sub-Saharan Africa contains vast reserves of critical minerals, including rare earth elements essential for technology manufacturing and renewable energy systems. International companies developing these resources require security services that local governments cannot provide through their own military or police forces. The economic stakes involved in these projects justify premium pricing for PMC services while creating multi-year contract relationships that provide stable revenue streams. Competition with local security forces creates complex dynamics that require careful navigation by PMCs operating in emerging markets. Constellis must work alongside national militaries and police forces that often view private contractors with suspicion or resentment, particularly when PMC personnel possess superior equipment, training, and operational capabilities. The company addresses these tensions through partnership programs that provide training and equipment transfers to local forces while maintaining operational control over critical security functions that clients require PMCs to handle directly. National military relationships in emerging markets often involve training partnerships where PMCs provide specialized instruction that government forces cannot access through traditional military-to-military cooperation programs. These training relationships create ongoing dependencies as local forces require continuous education on new equipment, tactics, and technologies that PMCs introduce through their operations. The training programs generate additional revenue streams while establishing relationships that facilitate future contract expansions and operational cooperation. Long-term strategic implications of PMC expansion into emerging markets include the potential for private military contractors to influence regional stability and governance in ways that government policymakers may not fully understand or control. As PMCs become integrated into the security architecture of developing nations, their operational decisions and client relationships shape regional conflicts, resource allocation, and political dynamics. The companies operate according to corporate interests and client requirements that may not align with broader American foreign policy objectives or regional stability goals. Cultural and operational challenges facing PMCs in new environments require significant adaptations to standard operating procedures and personnel management approaches. Constellis personnel operating in sub-Saharan Africa must navigate complex tribal relationships, religious sensitivities, and local customs that differ dramatically from the Middle Eastern environments where the company developed much of its operational expertise. Language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, and different approaches to authority relationships create ongoing challenges that require specialized training and locally recruited personnel who understand regional dynamics. Environmental adaptation involves more than cultural sensitivity, extending into operational modifications that account for different climate conditions, terrain challenges, and infrastructure limitations that affect how PMCs conduct their missions. African operations require different equipment specifications, medical support capabilities, and logistics arrangements compared to European or Middle Eastern deployments. The company must maintain specialized equipment inventories, develop region-specific training programs, and establish local supply chains that support operations in areas where traditional military logistics networks do not exist. Regulatory gaps in developing nations create opportunities for PMC expansion while simultaneously creating legal and operational risks that companies must carefully manage. Many emerging market countries lack comprehensive legal frameworks governing private military operations, creating situations where PMCs operate in legal gray areas that provide operational flexibility while exposing companies to potential future liability. The absence of clear regulatory oversight allows PMCs to establish operations quickly, but also creates uncertainties about long-term legal protections and operational authorities. Government relationship management becomes particularly complex in emerging markets where political instability, corruption concerns, and weak institutional capacity create ongoing challenges for PMC operations. Constellis must navigate relationships with government officials who may lack experience working with private military contractors while maintaining operational security and legal compliance standards that protect the company from future political changes or regime transitions that could threaten ongoing operations. Regional investment strategies demonstrate the scale of PMC expansion into new markets. The 2011 America's Private Equity Partnership Investor Network pledged $1.7 billion toward regional development projects that required comprehensive security services, creating opportunities for PMCs to establish permanent operations across Latin America. Similarly, Constellis secured a $54 million naval contract in Singapore during 2024, illustrating how PMCs penetrate Asian markets through specialized maritime security services that government forces cannot provide independently. PMC operations in sub-Saharan Africa have fundamentally altered the continent's security landscape, with Constellis securing $890 million in contracts across 12 African nations. These operations now influence everything from resource extraction security to regional military training programs, while creating new dependencies on American private military expertise. Yet this rapid expansion into legally ambiguous territories has created a complex web of potential liabilities that threatens to undermine the entire private military industry through litigation that could expose operational practices to unprecedented scrutiny. Legal challenges and accountability. Corporate legal strategies have evolved into sophisticated systems that transform accountability from a justice mechanism into a manageable business expense. The legal battles surrounding Constellis extend far beyond the notorious Nassau Square incident that defined Blackwater's downfall, creating an ongoing pattern of litigation that demonstrates how private military contractors navigate responsibility through corporate structures rather than genuine transparency. The company faces a constant stream of lawsuits from former employees, foreign governments, civilian victims, and business partners who allege everything from wrongful death to financial fraud. These cases represent more than individual grievances against a single company. They reveal the fundamental challenges of holding private military contractors accountable within legal systems that were never designed to address the complexities of modern mercenary operations. Jurisdictional complexities create nearly insurmountable obstacles for anyone attempting to hold PMCs accountable through traditional legal channels. When Constellis personnel operate in foreign countries under contracts with American agencies, determining which courts have authority becomes a legal puzzle that can take years to resolve. The company's operations span multiple nations with different legal systems, each with varying levels of cooperation with American law enforcement and judicial processes. Personnel who commit alleged crimes in one country may flee to another jurisdiction before charges can be filed, while evidence collection across international borders faces diplomatic and logistical barriers that often prove insurmountable. Recent legal cases have tested the boundaries of PMC accountability in ways that previous generations of litigation never addressed. The case of Brundle versus Wilmington Trust, NA, represents a different category of legal challenge entirely, focusing on financial misconduct rather than operational activities. Bailey Glasser LLP secured a significant victory in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, which found that Wilmington Trust's fiduciary failures caused the Constellis employee stock ownership plan to overpay for Constellis Group stock by $29,773,250. This ruling demonstrates that PMCs face legal vulnerabilities through their corporate structures and financial arrangements, not just their field operations. The financial and reputational stakes of legal challenges create existential threats that force PMCs to invest heavily in legal defense strategies that prioritize damage control over accountability. Legal fees for defending against major lawsuits can reach millions of dollars annually, while potential damages from successful plaintiffs could bankrupt smaller PMC operations entirely. The reputational damage from high-profile legal cases affects contract negotiations, employee recruitment, and corporate partnerships that generate revenue streams essential for ongoing operations. Companies that lose major legal battles may find themselves excluded from future government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. International legal frameworks continue evolving to address PMC operations, but enforcement mechanisms remain weak and inconsistent across different jurisdictions. The Military Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act was expanded in October 2007 to encompass all security contractors working overseas, not just those working under the Department of Defense. However, the practical application of these frameworks faces significant challenges when contractors operate in countries that lack extradition treaties with the United States or refuse to cooperate with American law enforcement investigations. The result is a patchwork of legal authorities that PMCs can navigate to minimize their exposure to prosecution. Insurance and liability mechanisms protect PMCs from prosecution through sophisticated risk management strategies that transfer financial responsibility to third parties while maintaining operational secrecy. Constellis maintains insurance policies that cover potential liabilities arising from operational activities, but the specific terms and coverage limits remain confidential. These insurance arrangements often include provisions that require cooperation with defense strategies, creating situations where insurance companies have financial incentives to help PMCs avoid liability rather than ensure accountability for misconduct. The insurance industry's involvement in PMC risk management creates another layer of corporate protection that shields companies from the full consequences of their actions. Corporate liability structures involve complex arrangements of parent companies, subsidiaries, and shell corporations that make it difficult to determine legal responsibility when things go wrong. Constellis operates through multiple corporate entities that provide services under different names and legal jurisdictions. When lawsuits arise, plaintiffs often struggle to identify the correct corporate entity to sue, while assets and personnel can be transferred between subsidiaries to avoid court judgments. These corporate structures are designed by lawyers who specialize in limiting liability exposure, creating legal mazes that can take years for plaintiffs to navigate successfully. Lobbying efforts by the PMC industry shape legislation governing private military contractors through coordinated campaigns that influence both federal and state lawmakers. Industry associations employ former government officials who understand the legislative process and maintain relationships with key congressional staff members. These lobbying efforts focus on preventing new oversight requirements, limiting liability exposure, and ensuring that existing legal frameworks remain favorable to PMC operations. The financial resources available for lobbying far exceed those available to advocacy groups that seek greater PMC accountability. The conflict between operational secrecy and legal transparency creates fundamental tensions that courts struggle to resolve fairly. PMCs argue that revealing operational details would compromise national security, endanger personnel, and violate client confidentiality agreements. However, meaningful legal accountability requires access to information about what actually happened during disputed incidents. Courts must balance these competing interests while lacking the expertise to evaluate whether security claims are legitimate or simply convenient excuses to avoid transparency. The result is often compromised legal proceedings that satisfy neither accountability nor security requirements. Settlement strategies employed by PMCs prioritize secrecy over justice through agreements that prevent public disclosure of misconduct while avoiding admission of legal responsibility. These settlements typically include non-disclosure agreements that prevent plaintiffs from discussing case details, sealed court records that hide evidence from public view, and financial terms that remain confidential. The settlement process allows PMCs to resolve legal challenges without creating precedents that could encourage additional lawsuits or regulatory action. Victims receive financial compensation in exchange for their silence about company misconduct. Legal precedents established through PMC litigation shape the entire industry's approach to accountability and risk management. Successful defense strategies used by one company quickly spread throughout the industry, while legal victories by plaintiffs create new vulnerabilities that all PMCs must address. The outcomes of major cases influence insurance rates, contract terms, and operational procedures across the private military sector. Companies monitor each other's legal challenges closely, adjusting their own practices based on what proves successful in court. The long-term implications of current legal trends suggest that PMCs will continue operating with limited accountability while facing increasing litigation costs and insurance requirements. The legal system's inability to provide meaningful oversight of PMC operations encourages companies to view legal challenges as business expenses rather than accountability mechanisms. This dynamic creates incentives for PMCs to invest in legal defense capabilities rather than operational improvements that might prevent incidents from occurring in the first place. The sophisticated legal architecture protecting modern PMCs from meaningful consequences has created a system where corporate survival takes precedence over justice, transforming accountability into a manageable cost of doing business. Yet these corporate protections cannot shield the industry from its most persistent challenge, the human cost of operations that place thousands of individuals in harm's way across the globe. The human cost, personnel, and casualties. Behind every corporate earnings report and contract announcement lies a reality that Constellis prefers to keep private. The human beings who carry out these operations face death and injury at rates that would shock most Americans. The men and women deployed by private military contractors work in environments where violence is routine, medical evacuation takes hours or days, and the psychological toll accumulates over years of exposure to trauma that most people never experience. These personnel operate without the institutional support systems that protect uniformed military members, yet they face identical risks while generating profits for shareholders who never see the physical and emotional costs of their investments. Recruitment challenges across the PMC industry reflect the fundamental contradiction between the dangerous nature of the work and the corporate structure that treats personnel as expendable assets. Companies struggle to maintain adequate staffing levels as experienced operators leave for less dangerous careers or retire due to accumulated injuries and psychological trauma. The personnel turnover rate within PMCs exceeds 35% annually, forcing companies to constantly recruit, train, and deploy new personnel who lack the experience that only comes from extended exposure to high-risk environments. This turnover creates operational risks as inexperienced personnel make mistakes that endanger missions and increase casualty rates. The backgrounds and motivations of people who choose PMC careers reveal a complex mix of economic necessity, professional ambition, and personal circumstances that drive individuals toward high-risk private military employment. Former military personnel represent the largest category of PMC recruits, drawn by salaries that can exceed their government military pay by 200 to 400%. Veterans struggling with civilian employment after military service find PMC work familiar and financially rewarding, even when they understand the risks involved. Law enforcement officers, firefighters, and emergency medical technicians also transition to PMC careers, bringing specialized skills that companies value highly. Economic motivations dominate recruitment strategies as companies compete for qualified personnel through salary packages that can reach $150,000 to $300,000 annually for experienced operators. These compensation levels represent life-changing income for individuals from working-class backgrounds who lack college degrees or specialized civilian skills. The financial incentives prove particularly attractive to personnel. Supporting families, paying mortgages, or saving for children's education expenses that civilian salaries cannot cover. Companies exploit these economic pressures through recruitment campaigns that emphasize financial rewards while minimizing discussion of casualty statistics or long-term health risks. Families and communities affected by PMC operations experience unique challenges that differ significantly from those faced by traditional military families. PMC families lack access to the support networks, medical benefits, and survivor assistance programs available to military spouses and children. When PMC personnel deploy for months at a time, their families manage without the community support systems that military bases provide. Children of PMC employees attend schools where counselors and teachers lack understanding of the unique stresses associated with private military deployment. Spouses struggle with isolation and anxiety while lacking access to mental health resources designed for military families. Casualty rates within PMC operations exceed those of most traditional military units due to the high-risk nature of assignments that companies accept and the operational environments where personnel work. These casualties result from everything from vehicle accidents and equipment failures to direct combat engagement and terrorist attacks targeting PMC facilities and personnel. The injury rates prove even higher, with thousands of PMC personnel suffering permanent disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, and psychological trauma that affects their ability to work and maintain family relationships. Medical support systems for PMC personnel vary dramatically between companies and deployment locations, creating disparities in care quality that can determine whether injured personnel survive or recover fully from their injuries. Some PMC operations maintain sophisticated medical facilities with trauma surgeons and emergency care capabilities, while others rely on basic first aid training and evacuation to distant hospitals. The quality of medical care often depends on contract values and client requirements rather than standardized care protocols that military medical systems provide. Personnel deployed to remote locations may wait hours for medical evacuation while bleeding from wounds that military medical systems would treat within minutes. Psychological support and veteran services available to former PMC employees remain inadequate compared to the needs created by exposure to combat trauma and high-stress environments. Most PMCs provide limited mental health resources during employment and virtually no support after personnel leave company employment. Former PMC employees struggle to access veteran services through government programs because their service was private rather than military, creating gaps in care for individuals suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and other mental health conditions associated with combat exposure. The suicide rates among former PMC personnel appear elevated compared to general population statistics, though companies rarely track or report these figures publicly. Healthcare costs associated with PMC employment create long-term financial obligations that companies manage through insurance policies and legal settlements that prioritize cost control over comprehensive care. Constellis allocated $127 million in death benefits and medical costs during 2024 to 2025, representing a substantial financial commitment that reflects the scope of injuries and fatalities within company operations. These expenditures include immediate medical care, disability payments, survivor benefits, and legal settlements with families of deceased personnel. The company's willingness to invest in these benefits demonstrates both the frequency of casualties and the legal requirements that force PMCs to provide financial support for injured employees and surviving family members. The broader social implications of privatizing military risk and sacrifice extend beyond individual casualties into fundamental questions about how American society distributes the costs of international military operations. When companies hire private contractors to perform military functions, the human costs become corporate expenses rather than national sacrifices that generate political accountability and public awareness. This privatization of risk allows policymakers to pursue military objectives without the political costs associated with military casualties that appear in newspaper headlines and generate public opposition to foreign interventions. Economic incentives continue driving recruitment despite obvious risks, as Constellis implemented 40% salary increases to maintain staffing levels adequate for operational requirements. These salary increases demonstrate how companies respond to personnel shortages created by high casualty rates and turnover problems that threaten their ability to fulfill contract obligations. The willingness to pay premium wages reflects the difficulty of recruiting qualified personnel willing to accept risks while working for corporations rather than serving national military objectives that justify personal sacrifice. Yet these human costs represent merely operational expenses within a broader corporate strategy that treats military power as an investment opportunity subject to the same financial optimization techniques. Apollo's master plan, corporate integration. The financial architecture supporting these operations reveals how thoroughly private equity has transformed military contracting into standardized investment products. Apollo Global Management's strategic vision for Constellis represents something unprecedented in American corporate history: the complete integration of private military power into mainstream investment portfolios where warfare becomes just another asset class generating quarterly returns. The private equity giant views Constellis not as a controversial military contractor, but as a profitable service business that happens to specialize in armed security rather than restaurant franchises or retail operations. This perspective transforms private military operations from matters of national security policy into corporate efficiency metrics measured by the same financial analysts who evaluate fast food chains and consumer goods companies within Apollo's diverse investment portfolio. Apollo acquired Constellis in 2014 for an undisclosed sum, positioning the private military contractor within a portfolio that includes diverse businesses ranging from consumer brands to global retailers. This acquisition reflects a broader trend of private equity involvement in the defense sector, where firms seek to capitalize on the growing demand for security and risk management services. The 2024 recapitalization deal that generated $1 billion in revenues reduced debt and positioned Constellis for continued growth, demonstrating how private equity ownership applies standard financial optimization techniques to military contracting operations. Wall Street's growing control over private military power creates fundamental tensions between profit maximization and national security objectives that traditional government oversight mechanisms cannot address effectively. Apollo manages Constellis according to the same return on investment criteria applied to every other portfolio company, regardless of whether the business involves selling hamburgers or conducting armed operations in conflict zones. Board meetings evaluate PMC performance through revenue growth metrics, profit margin improvements, and market expansion opportunities without meaningful consideration of the strategic implications these decisions create for American foreign policy or international stability. The synergies between PMC operations and Apollo's other business investments extend far beyond simple financial diversification into operational relationships that most investors never recognize. Constellis provides security services for Apollo-owned retail properties, executive protection for senior management across the investment portfolio, and risk assessment capabilities that inform investment decisions in unstable regions where Apollo considers business opportunities. These internal business relationships create cost savings and revenue streams that benefit Apollo's overall portfolio performance while obscuring the true extent of PMC integration into mainstream corporate operations. Corporate governance mechanisms that oversee PMC operations operate according to private equity standards rather than defense industry protocols, creating accountability gaps that government oversight cannot effectively address. Apollo's board includes investment professionals, former corporate executives, and financial specialists who lack experience with military operations or national security policy. These directors evaluate Constellis' performance through quarterly earnings reports, annual strategic plans, and financial projections that treat combat operations as business activities measured by profitability rather than operational effectiveness or strategic value. The potential for conflicts of interest between profit motives and national security becomes apparent when examining how investment decisions affect PMC operational priorities. Apollo's financial interests may favor contract opportunities that generate higher profit margins, even when these opportunities conflict with broader American strategic objectives or create operational risks that government agencies prefer to avoid. The company's obligation to maximize returns for Apollo's investors creates incentives to pursue business opportunities regardless of their impact on regional stability or long-term American interests. Investor relations and shareholder communications treat warfare as a business opportunity through corporate documents that discuss military operations using the same language applied to consumer goods marketing or restaurant franchise development. Apollo's annual reports describe PMC growth opportunities, market penetration strategies, and competitive positioning without acknowledging the human costs or geopolitical implications associated with private military expansion. Investor presentations highlight revenue growth potential in emerging conflict zones using PowerPoint slides that could easily describe retail expansion plans or technology market opportunities. Exit strategies and potential future sales of PMC assets demonstrate how private equity ownership transforms military capabilities into tradable commodities that can be bought and sold based on financial considerations rather than national security requirements. Apollo's investment strategy includes specific timelines for divesting Constellis assets through either strategic sales to other companies or potential market offerings that would transfer ownership to institutional investors and individual shareholders. These plans treat private military capabilities as temporary investments rather than long-term strategic assets that require stable ownership and consistent operational priorities. The accountability gaps between corporate shareholders and operational consequences become evident when examining how investment returns depend on activities that shareholders never directly observe or evaluate. Pension funds, mutual funds, and individual investors who benefit from Apollo's PMC investments receive quarterly profit distributions without knowledge of the specific operations that generate these returns. The financial mechanisms that deliver investment profits effectively shield shareholders from moral responsibility for PMC activities while ensuring that they benefit financially from private military operations conducted on their behalf. Corporate integration of private military operations into mainstream business portfolios creates systemic risks that extend beyond individual company performance into broader questions about how democratic societies control military power. When private equity firms own military contractors, the traditional mechanisms for democratic oversight and accountability become ineffective because corporate shareholders lack the information and incentives necessary to evaluate operational decisions that affect national security and international stability. Strategic planning processes within Apollo demonstrate how private equity ownership transforms military planning into corporate development activities guided by financial projections rather than strategic assessments. Constellis expansion plans focus on market opportunities that offer attractive profit margins and growth potential without necessarily considering whether these opportunities align with American foreign policy objectives or contribute to international stability. The company's strategic planning process resembles business development activities at consumer goods companies more than military planning processes used by government agencies. Financial market pressures that could affect PMC operations include quarterly earnings expectations, performance requirements, and analyst coverage that evaluates company performance according to financial metrics rather than operational effectiveness or strategic value. These market pressures force PMC management to prioritize financial performance over long-term operational capabilities or strategic relationships that government clients consider essential for national security objectives. The complete transformation of military power into corporate assets raises fundamental questions about whether democratic institutions can maintain meaningful control over privatized warfare. The 2024 recapitalization that generated $1 billion in revenues demonstrates how private equity strategies have completely blurred the lines between corporate portfolios and private military operations. Constellis now operates according to the same financial optimization principles that Apollo applies to consumer brands, transforming warfare into quarterly earnings reports evaluated by investment analysts who treat combat deployments as business development opportunities. This transformation represents the complete privatization of American military power, where democratic accountability has been replaced by shareholder profit requirements. Apollo's $671 billion in assets under management includes a private army that generates more revenue than many Fortune 500 companies while maintaining operational secrecy that prevents meaningful public oversight. The company that emerged from Blackwater's ashes now operates as America's largest private military contractor, deploying personnel to over 50 countries while remaining virtually unknown to the American public whose tax dollars fund many of its operations.